Everything came crashing down when, right after my son died, my daughter in law threw me out like trash. While the will was being read, she sneered at me. You won't get a single dime from your son's will, I promise you that. But the lawyer, Mr. Finch, just smiled and said, There's one more item, the most important one. When he read it, my daughter-in-law passed out cold. You won't believe what was written there. I can finally rest. The words hit me like ice water. I stood frozen by my son Julian's casket, the funeral program shaking in my hands. My daughter-in-law, Yvette, was checking her phone again, scrolling through messages like she hadn't just referred to my dead son, and as a burden she was finally rid of. Yvette, my voice cracked in the cold March air. We just buried my son. Show some respect for the dead. She looked up from her screen, irritation flashing across her perfectly made-up face. The wind cut across the cemetery, scattering the white lilies Rhonda had placed on nearby graves. Other attendees were walking toward their cars, but their conversations had stopped. They were listening now. Your son? Yvette's laugh was sharp and bitter. He was my husband, Julian. And now, everything he had is mine. The funeral program tore a little in my hand. My engineer's mind, always precise, couldn't process what I was hearing. This woman had stood by Julian for 7 years. She had promised to love him in sickness and in health. And yet, here she was, 30 minutes after we'd lowered him into the earth, talking about possession and property. What is wrong with you? I whispered, though my voice carried more than I intended. At least pretend to be sad. Darius Grant, Julian's business partner, had stopped. He stood a few feet away, holding his wife's arm, both looking at us with clear shock. Rhonda was hurrying over, her face pale with concern. Yvette tucked her phone into her designer handbag. Sad? Marcus, I've been planning my new life for months. Julian knew this marriage was over. We both knew it. That isn't true. The words came out choked. He loved you, even when the cancer was convenient. She adjusted her expensive black coat, the one Julian had bought her last Christmas. It gave me time to think, to plan. Now I can finally live again. Rhonda reached us just as Yvette turned toward the parking lot. Yvette, please, this isn't the time or the place. Actually, Rhonda, this is exactly the time. Yvette's heels clicked against the concrete path. I've spent 18 months playing the dutiful wife. I'm done acting. The remaining guests gathered in small clusters, whispering among themselves. Mrs. Peterson from the church slowly shook her head. The 3 men from Julian's engineering team looked uncomfortable, shuffling their feet and avoiding eye contact. I watched Yvette walk away with a confident, deliberate stride. She hadn't shed a single tear during the service, not one. While I had barely held myself together reading the eulogy, she had sat in the front row checking her watch and tapping her manicured nails against the wooden pew. Marcus, Rhonda's hand touched my shoulder. Are you okay? I couldn't answer. My throat felt raw, scraped by disbelief and a rising fury. The woman Julian had trusted with his life, his business, his love. She had been counting the days until his death, planning her escape while he fought for every breath. The wind picked up again, rattling the bare branches above us. Yvette reached her silver luxury sedan, the one Julian had given her for their 5th anniversary. She didn't look back once. Standing by my friend's grave, I wondered what Julian would think if he could see her now. Would he be heartbroken? Angry? Or had he suspected what I was only starting to understand? The expensive car pulled away, disappearing down the curving cemetery road. Now I was alone, except for Rhonda, waiting patiently beside me, and the groundskeepers far off, preparing to fill the grave. My hands were still shaking as I looked down at Julian's photograph on the torn program. His smile looked back at me, confident and warm, the way he'd always been, the way he'd been even during those last few weeks, making mysterious calls to Mr. Finch and insisting everything would be sorted out. Looking at Julian's face in that photograph, I felt something break inside my chest. It wasn't pain this time. It was something deeper. Pride, mixed with a desperate longing for one more conversation with my brilliant boy. The wind scattered more flower petals over the fresh earth of the grave. I closed my eyes and let myself remember. Julian, at 8 years old, standing in our garage workshop, with model airplane glue on his fingers and determination in his dark eyes. He had insisted on painting his planes purple and gold, instead of the realistic silver and green the instruction manual suggested. "Dad, why do planes have to be silver?" he'd asked, holding up his glittering purple fighter jet. "I want to make mine different, special." Even then, he refused to follow conventional rules. While other kids built their models exactly as instructed, Julian experimented, modifying wing angles, adjusting landing gear, creating his own color combinations. Half of his planes crashed during test flights, but the ones that flew were spectacular. I opened my eyes and looked at the photograph again. That same stubborn creativity had earned him millions. I remembered the family dinner in 2016. Julian was explaining his latest business idea, gesturing excitedly with his fork. His mother had died the year before, and these Sunday dinners had become sacred to both of us. "I have an idea for an app that could help people organize their schedules better," he'd said, his eyes bright with possibility. "But not just calendars, Dad. Something that learns your patterns, predicts what you need, helps you make better decisions about your time." I worried he was dreaming too big. "Son, calendar apps already exist. Tons of them. But none that think like humans." He'd pulled out his phone, sketching diagrams on napkins. What if technology could actually make our lives simpler instead of more complicated? That application became Synchro Time. Within 2 years, he had sold it for $12 million. But the memory that hurt the most was from only 3 years ago. Julian had driven up to my house in the suburb, arriving unannounced on a Tuesday night with champagne and news that would change everything. "Dad, I'm going to take care of you when you retire. You've worked enough." He had pulled out his phone, showing me the latest valuation report for Synchrotech Solutions, $70 million. "Dad, can you believe it?" I couldn't believe it. My son, who once built purple planes in my garage, had created something worth more money than I had earned in my entire career as a civil engineer. "Julian, that's incredible. But I don't need—" "Yes, you do need it." His voice had been firm but gentle. "You've taken care of me my whole life. Let me return the favor. I'm buying you that workshop you always wanted, the one with proper ventilation and all the tools you've been dreaming of." That workshop was now in my backyard, barely used since his diagnosis. I'd been too busy caring for him to build anything. Rhonda cleared her throat softly. "Marcus, it's getting cold. Maybe we should—" I shook my head. I wasn't ready to leave him yet, not when these memories were all that was left of his voice, his laugh, his absolute certainty that everything would work out. Julian had always been a planner. Even as a kid, he mapped out his days, his projects, his dreams, with an engineering precision that matched my own. He'd inherited that from me, the need to understand how things worked, to fix problems before they became disasters. But there was one problem he couldn't fix, one timeline he couldn't control. The memory I had been avoiding all today broke through. The phone call from Julian 18 months ago, his voice steady, despite the news that would destroy everything we'd planned. Dad, I have cancer, but I'm going to fight this. Standing in the cemetery wind, I realized I needed to remember that fight too. Not just the good times, but the battle that had shown me who my son truly was, and who his wife truly was. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in September of 2023. I was rebuilding the fence for my neighbor when Julian called. His voice was unusually formal. Dad, I have cancer, but I'm going to fight this. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. The words hit like sledgehammers. Aggressive, advanced, poor prognosis. I dropped my tools and drove straight to the Midtown Oncology Center, where Julian was meeting with his oncology team. He looked smaller in that hospital bed, but his eyes were determined. Yvette sat beside him, perfectly composed, already taking notes on her phone about treatment schedules and logistics. The doctors say chemo might buy us 18 months, maybe 2 years if we're lucky, Julian explained. His business mind was already analyzing scenarios. I've arranged for Darius to handle day-to-day operations at Synchrotech. Dr. Anya Sharma described the treatment plan: aggressive chemotherapy every 3 weeks, possible surgery if the tumors responded, radiation therapy to manage pain. Julian listened like he was planning a product launch, asking detailed questions about success rates and side effects. I'll drive you treatments, I said immediately. Yvette looked up from her phone. Actually, Marcus, I can handle his medical appointments. You don't need to worry about that. But within 3 months, her tone had completely changed. It was March of 2024. Julian was halfway through his chemotherapy regimen, and the treatments were brutal. He had lost a lot of weight and most of his hair, but he still insisted on attending important business meetings. I had been driving him to every single appointment because Yvette had begun finding excuses. I can't keep watching this, she told me one afternoon while Julian slept after his latest chemo session. You're better at taking care of him anyway. He needs someone stronger right now. Stronger, as if loving my son through his illness were some kind of burden instead of a privilege. By the summer, I had moved into their guest room. Julian needed help with basic tasks, cooking meals he could keep down, managing his medication, driving back and forth from treatments when he was too weak to drive himself. Yvette had retreated to her office, claiming she was managing emotional stress by keeping busy. The truth was simpler. She was planning her exit. I caught her on phone calls with real estate agents, discussing property value and market timing. She researched divorce lawyers, though she never filed the papers. Why bother when cancer was going to solve her problem more efficiently? How much longer is this going to take? She asked me one evening in October, while Julian rested upstairs. I have plans to make, Marcus. I can't put my life on hold indefinitely. I stared at her, speechless. My son was fighting for his life, and she was irritated by the inconvenience. But Julian saw more than I had realized. During his last month, when treatments had stopped working and hospice care began, he made mysterious appointments with Mr. Alistair Finch, his family lawyer. They met in Julian's home office for hours, reviewing documents he wouldn't let me see. Dad, I've taken care of your future, he told me during one of our last real conversations. His voice was weak, but his eyes were sharp and resolved. Trust Mr. Finch. He'll explain everything after I'm gone. Julian, you don't need to worry about me. Just focus on getting better. I'm not going to get better. His honesty was brutal and clean, like everything else about him. But I've made sure Yvette can't hurt you, or anyone else I care about. I hadn't understood what he meant then. Sitting by his grave now, watching the groundskeepers approach with their shovels, I was beginning to suspect that my son had been planning one last project, the most important one of his life. The wind was getting stronger, and the last attendees had drifted away. Rhonda had retreated to her car, giving me space to grieve privately. Soon I would have to leave Julian here in the cold earth and return to a world where Yvette believed she had won everything. But something in my son's final words suggested the game wasn't over yet. Footsteps crunched on the cemetery gravel behind me. I turned to see Darius approaching with Rhonda and two other colleagues, their faces grim with genuine sorrow. These were people who truly cared for Julian. Unlike the woman who was now 10 feet away, still checking her phone. Marcus? Darius extended his hand, his grip firm and warm. Julian was brilliant. His company changed the whole industry, the way he revolutionized project management software. We'll never see another mind like his. Before I could answer, Yvette's voice cut the cold air like glass. Yes, and now that brilliance will finally pay off. She looked up from her screen with a smug smile. All those years of hard work are about to benefit the right people. Darius's jaw tightened. Rhonda moved closer to me, her maternal instinct sensing danger. The other colleagues exchanged awkward glances, suddenly finding their shoes fascinating. Yvette, I said quietly, these people are here to honor Julian. Oh, I am honoring him. She put her phone away in her purse with deliberate slowness. By making sure his success isn't wasted on sentimentality. Dr. Sophia Reyes, one of Julian's lead developers, cleared her throat uncomfortably. We should probably get back to the office. There are projects to discuss. Actually, Yvette said, her voice rising with false cheer, there won't be any projects for a while. I'll be reorganizing everything once the legal formalities are complete. Darius's jaw clenched. Yvette, Julian built that company with specific goals. His team knows how to... His team works for me now. She checked her expensive watch, the one Julian had bought her for their anniversary. Everything works for me now. Rhonda discreetly pressed a small piece of paper into my palm, her phone number written in careful script. If you need anything, she whispered, you can always call. I nodded gratefully, tucking the paper into my coat pocket. At least someone in this world still understood basic human decency. The remaining guests started their awkward goodbyes, murmuring quick condolences before hurrying toward the parking area. Mrs. Peterson shook her head as she walked past Yvette, disapproval written on her weathered features. The young pastor who had officiated the service looked like he wanted to say something, but then thought better of it. In 10 minutes, only Yvette and I were left by Julian's grave. The temperature was dropping as evening approached, and my breath came out in small white clouds. She seemed immune to the cold, energized by some internal fire I was only beginning to comprehend. Marcus? Her tone shifted, becoming professional and sharp. We need to discuss living arrangements. Something icy settled in my stomach. What do you mean? I mean your housing situation. She jangled her car keys impatiently. We'll handle this at the house. There are documents you need to see. The way she said documents made my engineer's mind start calculating probabilities. None of them good. Julian had been so careful about everything else. Had he somehow failed to protect me from his own wife? Yvette, I've lived in that house for 18 months, since Julian got sick. Yes. Her smile was as sharp as the winter wind. And now, Julian is gone. She turned and walked toward her silver luxury sedan, her heels tapping against the concrete with mechanical precision. I watched her confident stride. The way she moved like someone who had already won a game I didn't know we were playing. Standing alone by my son's grave, I felt the first real fear I'd experienced since his diagnosis. Julian had warned me to trust Mr. Finch, but Mr. Finch wasn't here. The only person who might have answers was walking away from me into a car that cost more than my annual pension. I looked at Julian's photograph one last time. Then I folded the funeral program carefully and put it in my jacket pocket next to Rhonda's phone number. Whatever Yvette had planned, I was about to find out. The 15-minute drive back to the suburb took place in suffocating silence. Yvette drove with the radio off, her manicured fingers tapping the steering wheel to the rhythm of some internal countdown. I watched familiar subdivisions roll past the passenger window, each landmark reminding me of trips I had taken with Julian over the years. As we pulled into the circular driveway of the large family home, my headlights caught something that made me gasp. 3 large suitcases sitting on the front steps like abandoned luggage. "What are those?" I asked, though my gut already knew the answer. Yvette parked with deliberate precision and cut the engine. "Your belongings are by the door. This house is mine now." I stared at the suitcases, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. "Yvette, this is illegal. I'm officially registered here. This is my address on all my documents." She got out of the car and walked toward the front door with sure steps, pulling out her house keys. "Read the lease agreement, Marcus. Julian leased you a room. The contract ended with his death. Lease agreement." I followed her up the brick steps, my legs feeling weak. "What agreement?" Instead of opening the door, she reached into her handbag and pulled out a folder. Inside were 3 pages of neatly typed legal documents bearing Julian's signature from 12 months ago. "Room rental agreement," she read aloud, her voice crisp with satisfaction. "Month-to-month tenancy between lessor Julian Thorne and lessee Marcus Thorne. Automatic termination upon the lessor's death." My hands were shaking as I scanned the papers under the porch light. Julian's signature looked authentic. The dates were correct. The legal language was precise and binding. "We just buried your husband," I said, my voice breaking with disbelief. "And now, my new life begins." She stood in the doorway, with her arms crossed, blocking my entry to the house where I had nursed my dying son. Julian wouldn't have wanted this, not without warning. He loved me. He wanted me taken care of. Julian is dead. Her voice was flat, unemotional. "I am alive, and this property belongs to me. The deed is in my name as the surviving spouse." I looked past her, into the warm, lit hallway where Julian and I had shared so many conversations during his illness. The workshop he'd built for me was visible through the kitchen window. $10,000 worth of tools and equipment I'd barely had time to use. "My tools, my workshop. Your workshop is on my property. You can arrange to have everything moved once you find somewhere to live." Where am I supposed to go? It's almost 7 o'clock on the day of my son's funeral. "That is not my problem." She stepped aside just enough to grab the front doorknob. "Your belongings are packed. Your tenancy period has expired. If you haven't left in 15 minutes, I'm calling the police for trespassing." The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. This woman had eaten at my table. She had accepted my care during Julian's illness. She had smiled and played the dutiful wife while she planned this exact moment. I walked back to my old car and started loading the suitcases into the trunk and back seat. Everything I owned now fit into 3 bags: clothes, a few books, Julian's photographs, and the small box of model airplanes we'd built when he was young. Yvette watched from the doorway, her silhouette framed by the warm light of the house that was no longer my home. She didn't move to help, didn't speak, just waited for me to finish and leave. As I closed the car trunk,
She called out one last statement. "Don't come back without an appointment, Marcus. This is private property now." The door shut with a solid click, followed by the sound of deadbolts turning. The lights started going out in the house, room by room, as if she was erasing my presence from every space I had occupied. I sat in my car for a moment with the engine running, the heat blowing against my face. Through the window, I could see the workshop Julian had built, the tools gleaming in the dark. I had spent 18 months of my life in that house, taking care of my son, watching him fight, fail, and die with dignity. Now I was homeless, on the day of his funeral. The radio played soft instrumental music as I drove away from that suburb, following signs toward the cheaper motels on the edge of the city. In my rearview mirror, the big house grew smaller until it disappeared completely, taking with it the last physical connection to my son's life. But Yvette had made a mistake. She had shown her hand too early. Julian had been planning something with Mr. Finch, and tomorrow I was going to find out what it was. The blinking neon sign that read Sun Motel Rooms looked like a lifeline in the growing darkness. I'd spent 2 hours driving around the outer suburbs of the city, comparing rates at establishments that became progressively more run down as my options narrowed. $65 a night was manageable for a few days, though my modest savings wouldn't stretch much further. The desk clerk barely looked up from his magazine as I signed the register. Room 127 was at the far end of the parking lot, sandwiched between a noisy ice machine and a stairwell that smelled of cigarettes and industrial cleaner. Inside, the room felt like a time warp. Faded floral bedspread, 80s era faux wood furniture, and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. The contrast with the mansion I'd called home just hours earlier would have been laughable if it wasn't so devastating. I unpacked methodically, hanging my funeral suit in the narrow closet and arranging my few possessions on the small table by the window. The lease agreement documents lay spread across the scratched surface like evidence at a crime scene. Under the harsh overhead light, Julian's signature looked even more authentic, more damning. Outside, the freeway traffic hummed steadily past the motel, punctuated by the occasional truck shifting gears or a motorcycle roaring toward the city. The sound was strangely comforting. Proof that the world kept moving when your own life had just derailed. I found Mr. Finch's business card in my wallet, tucked behind a photograph of Julian at his college graduation. The card was slightly folded from years of carrying it, but the phone number was still legible. A vintage rotary phone sat on the nightstand, another relic of decades past that somehow felt appropriate for my current situation. Mr. Finch answered on the third ring, his voice professionally warm despite the late hour. "Finch and Associates? Alistair speaking." "Mr. Finch, this is Marcus Thorne. I apologize for calling so late, but I need legal consultation." "Marcus?" His tone shifted immediately to genuine concern. "My deepest condolences about Julian. He was a remarkable young man. What happened?" I explained the eviction, the lease agreement, and Yvette's calculated timing. Mr. Finch listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of acknowledgement that told me he was taking careful notes. "Is this legal?" I asked when I was finished. "Can she really throw me out on the day of the funeral?" "Unfortunately, if the lease agreement is valid, she has the legal right to terminate the tenancy upon the lessor's death. State law is quite specific about month-to-month arrangements." He paused, and I could hear the rustle of papers. "However, there are other matters we must discuss. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning?" "What kind of matters?" "The reading of Julian's will. There are provisions you should know about." Something in his voice made my pulse quicken. "Provisions. I cannot discuss specifics over the phone, But Julian was very thorough in his planning, very thoughtful of the people he cared about. Another pause. Bring the lease agreement documents with you. I'll need to examine them carefully. We scheduled the appointment for 10 o'clock the next morning. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of the motel bed, looking out at the parking lot where my car sat surrounded by old trucks and sedans. A family was unloading suitcases 2 doors down. A father, mother, and 2 small children who looked excited about their motel adventure. I thought of Julian's last words. Trust Mr. Finch. He'll explain everything. At the time, I had assumed he was talking about funeral arrangements or simple estate matters. But something in Mr. Finch's voice suggested my son had been planning more than I had imagined. Julian's graduation photograph smiled at me from the nightstand. 22 years old, full of dreams and determination, standing next to me in his cap and gown. He had whispered something to me that day. Dad, one day, I'm going to take care of you the way you took care of me. Maybe he had found a way to keep that promise, even from beyond the grave. I switched off the harsh overhead light and settled against the thin pillows. Through the walls, I could hear a television, playing sitcom, laughter, and the distant sound of the family next door settling in for the night. Tomorrow, I would learn what Julian had truly been planning during those mysterious meetings with Mr. Finch. Tonight, I would try to get some sleep and prepare for whatever revelation awaited me in the morning. 4 days at the Sun Motel had taught me the rhythm of desperation, waking at dawn to the roar of the freeway, showering in a stall barely wide enough for my shoulders, instant coffee, and stale donuts from the vending machine, counting the dwindling bills in my wallet and calculating how many more nights I could afford. March 24th arrived gray and cold, but it felt different. Today brought answers. I dressed carefully, in my best suit, the navy blue one Julian had insisted I buy for his wedding 7 years ago. The irony was not lost on me. In the motel's cracked mirror, I looked like what I was, a 65-year-old man trying to hold on to dignity while living in a $65 a night room. The drive downtown took 45 minutes through morning traffic. The city skyline emerged gradually, glass towers reaching into overcast clouds that promised snow. I had driven these streets countless times during my engineering career, but today it felt like entering foreign territory. Finch & Associates occupied the 28th floor of a gleaming office building in the financial district. The elevator ride gave me time to settle my nerves and run through the questions I'd prepared. Mr. Finch had been cryptic during our phone conversation, mentioning surprises and provisions without detail. The reception area whispered expensive legal services, mahogany furniture, original artwork, and a view of the Great Lake that probably cost more per month than my pension. The receptionist, a professional woman in her 30s, smiled warmly as I announced myself. Mr. Thorne, Mr. Finch is expecting you. Conference room B. Mr. Finch rose from behind a table stacked with legal documents when I entered. He was younger than I expected, maybe 55, with silver temples and the steady handshake of someone accustomed to handling other people's crises. Marcus, thank you for coming. His voice carried a genuine warmth beneath the professional tone. Please have a seat. Coffee? Thank you. I settled into a leather chair that likely cost more than my monthly rent. Mr. Finch, I need to understand my situation. Yvette has made it clear she considers me an obstacle to be removed. He poured coffee from a silver carafe, his movements deliberate and reassuring. Julian left a very detailed will. There will be surprises. What surprises? Yvette says everything belongs to her as the surviving spouse. Julian anticipated various scenarios. Mr. Finch's smile was slight but encouraging. Trust the process, Marcus. Your son was extraordinarily thorough. I pulled out the lease agreement documents Yvette had presented. What about these? Can she really evict me based on Julian being my landlord? Mr. Finch examined the papers carefully, his expression revealing nothing. The lease agreement appears legitimate. However, probate law is complex. There are protections for family members that supersede simple landlord-tenant relationships. And the house... Can I move back in? Stay in the motel for now. His tone was firm, but reassuring. Everything will become clear very soon. I have scheduled the formal reading of the will for this Friday at 2 o'clock. All parties will be present. All parties? You, Yvette, and any witnesses Julian specified. Darius Grant from the company, Rhonda Johnson, as a family representative. He made notes on a legal pad. The reading will be recorded for legal purposes. Relief mingled with anxiety in my chest. Mr. Finch, I appreciate your help, but I need to ask about your fees. My resources are limited. Julian arranged for all legal expenses related to his estate to be covered. You do not need to worry about costs. Mr. Finch's smile widened slightly. Your son thought of everything, Marcus. Absolutely everything. Something in his tone suggested layers of meaning I couldn't yet grasp. Julian had always been a planner, but the precision of these arrangements seemed almost supernatural. Yvette will bring her own counsel, I assume. She has a right to legal representation during probate proceedings. Mr. Finch gathered the documents into neat stacks. Marcus, I want you to understand something important. Julian loved you deeply. Every provision in his will reflects that love. The words hit harder than I expected. 4 days of anger and despair had temporarily masked my grief, but Mr. Finch's quiet certainty brought it rushing back. My son had been protecting me even while fighting cancer, even while his wife planned my destruction. Friday at 2 o'clock, Mr. Finch confirmed, handing me an appointment card. 28th floor, conference room A. Bring identification and any documents you feel may be relevant. I stood to leave, feeling steadier than I had since the funeral. Mr. Finch, can you give me any hint about what Julian planned? Trust your son's judgment. His handshake was firm and final. He knew exactly what he was doing. The elevator ride down felt different from the one up. Instead of despair, I carried a cautious hope. Julian had been 3 moves ahead of everyone throughout his illness, apparently including his wife. Driving back to the motel through the afternoon traffic, I thought about the Friday confrontation. Yvette would arrive expecting a complete victory, likely with expensive legal representation. She had spent 4 days planning her next moves, confident in her position. But Julian had been planning for much longer. Friday morning arrived with the kind of bitter wind that makes March feel like winter's final assault. I had spent the previous 3 days at the motel, in a strange state of suspended animation, too anxious to read, too restless to sleep properly, too short on cash to do anything but wait. By 11 o'clock, I was dressed again in my funeral suit. Reviewing my appearance in the motel's unforgiving mirror, the face that looked back showed every one of my 65 years, plus the weight of the past week's ordeal. But my eyes held something they hadn't since Julian's diagnosis: purpose. The drive downtown felt different this time. Instead of desperation driving me toward Mr. Finch's office, I was moving toward answers. Whatever Julian had planned, today would unveil his final project, and I suspected it would be his masterpiece. I arrived at Finch and Associates 15 minutes early, partly out of anxiety and partly out of respect for the solemnity of the occasion. The same receptionist greeted me with professional sympathy, directing me to conference room A, larger than the room Mr. Finch and I had met in, with commanding views of the entire downtown area. Mr. Finch was already there, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and what appeared to be audio recording equipment. His demeanor was calm, but alert, like a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. "Marcus, right on time." He motioned to a chair across from the head of the table. "The others should be arriving shortly." The others turned out to be a parade of people whose reactions would define the afternoon. Darius arrived first, looking uncomfortable in a suit that suggested he'd rather be debugging code than attending legal proceedings. Rhonda followed, carrying a small handbag and wearing the expression of someone braced for family drama. Then Yvette arrived. She walked into the conference room like a woman attending her coronation, dressed in a costly black suit that managed to look both appropriately somber and triumphantly chic. Behind her walked a sharp-featured woman in her mid-40s, carrying a leather briefcase that screamed high-level legal representation. "Victoria Pena," the woman introduced herself with an energetic handshake. "I represent Mrs. Carter's interests during these proceedings." Yvette settled into her chair with the smug satisfaction of someone who had already won. She barely acknowledged my presence, focusing instead on the legal document spread at Mr. Finch's end of the table. Her smile was small, but unmistakable. "Marcus, why did you even come?" The words were delivered with cruelty, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "There's nothing here for you." Victoria Pena placed a restraining hand on her client's arm, but the damage was done. Darius shifted uncomfortably. Rhonda's face hardened with disapproval. "I'm here by legal right," I replied quietly. "As Julian's father." "Legal right to what?" "You've been living in my house as a tenant." "That agreement ended with my husband's death." Yvette's voice carried absolute certainty. "Victoria has reviewed all the documentation. Everything belongs to me, as the surviving spouse." Mr. Finch cleared his throat, commanding attention with professional authority. "Please, everyone settle down. Julian's will is very specific about all distributions. Let us proceed with proper formality." Victoria Pena opened her briefcase, extracting legal pads and what looked like prepared challenges. "My client expects to receive the entire estate as the legal wife. We are prepared to challenge any irregular provisions." "Duly noted," Mr. Finch said. He quietly activated the recording equipment with a soft click. "This is the formal reading of the last will and testament of Julian Thorne, dated December 15th, 2024. Present are Marcus Thorne, father, Yvette Carter, surviving spouse, Victoria Pena, counsel for Mrs. Carter, Darius Grant, and Rhonda Johnson, designated witnesses." The room went silent, save for the faint hum of traffic 28 floors below. Yvette leaned forward slightly, her posture radiating confidence. I gripped the arms of my chair, bracing myself for disappointment, but hoping for justice. Mr. Finch opened the thick document, his voice adopting the formal cadence of legal proceedings. "I, Julian Thorne, being of sound mind and memory, do hereby establish this as my last will and testament, revoking all prior wills and codicils." The preliminary language washed over me like background noise. My engineer's mind was focused on the substance that would determine whether I spent my remaining years in a motel room or something resembling a home. Yvette's fingers drummed silently against the conference table, marking time on her internal countdown to victory. But Mr. Finch's slight smile suggested the afternoon held surprises neither of us expected. "We now turn to the specific bequests and distributions," Mr. Finch announced, turning to the crucial pages of the document. The moment of truth had arrived. "To my beloved wife, Yvette Carter." Mr. Finch's voice rang through the silent conference room with measured precision. "I hereby leave the following assets: the family residence on Main Street, including all furniture and personal property contained therein, all vehicles currently registered in my name, including the 2024 luxury sedan model and the 2023 electric truck model, the checking and savings accounts at Central Bank totaling approximately $40,000. Yvette's smile bloomed like a poisonous flower. She leaned back in her chair with visible satisfaction, shooting me a triumphant glance. "See, Marcus, I told you you'd get nothing." Victoria Pena was making careful notes, but her expression suggested routine satisfaction rather than surprise. Darius stared intently at his hands, likely calculating the business implications of Yvette's inheritance. Rhonda watched me with concern, clearly expecting my devastation. Mr. Finch continued reading, giving no acknowledgement to Yvette's interruption. Additionally, Mrs. Carter receives all jewelry, artwork, and collectible items purchased during our marriage, valued at approximately $50,000. Mr.
"Finch," Yvette said with false sweetness, "I think we've covered everything important. Marcus can see that Julian was very clear about his intentions." "Actually," Mr. Finch calmly countered, "we have only covered the preliminary distributions. There are additional bequests." He turned the page with deliberate slowness. "To my father, Marcus Thorne, who sacrificed 18 months of his retirement to care for me during my illness, I hereby leave 50% ownership of Synchro Tech Solutions, including all stock, voting rights, and dividend distributions. This represents approximately $35 million in current market valuation." The silence that followed was deafening. Yvette's face lost all color, as if someone had pulled a drain plug, and Victoria Pena's pen froze mid-note. Darius's head snapped up with shock and something that looked like relief. "What?" Yvette's voice cracked like shattering glass. "That's impossible. I'm his wife. Everything should belong to me." Mr. Finch continued reading, as if she hadn't spoken. "Additionally, Mr. Thorne receives the workshop and all tools built for his use, to be relocated onto the property of his choice. All model airplane collections built together during Julian's youth, and the sum of $150,000 from the Memorial Education Fund." I couldn't breathe. 50% of Julian's company, $35 million. The workshop he'd built for my retirement. After a week of homelessness and desperation, my son had given me security beyond anything I had ever dreamed of. "This is fraud!" Yvette leapt to her feet, her carefully composed facade completely shattering. "I will challenge this ruling. You orchestrated this, you conniving old man." "Yvette," I managed to say through my shock, "this is legal. Julian had a right to distribute his assets as he wished." "Legal?" Her laugh was high and bitter. "You think I'll let you steal half of what is mine?" "Victoria, tell them this is challengeable." Victoria Pena was frantically flipping through her notes, clearly recalculating her entire strategy. "There may be grounds for undue influence claims, but nothing." Yvette's voice rose almost to a scream. "Julian was sick, dying. His judgment was compromised. This old man took advantage of his condition." Darius finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Yvette, I was present for several of Julian's business meetings right up to the end. His mind was perfectly clear. He knew exactly what he was doing." "You are all conspirators." Yvette wheeled around to face Mr. Finch. "How much did Marcus pay you to write this fiction?" Mr. Finch's voice remained professionally calm despite her accusations. "Mrs. Carter, I understand your disappointment, but these distributions were entirely Julian's decision. He spent considerable time ensuring every detail was legally sound." Yvette turned to me, her eyes burning with a fury that made her earlier cruelty seem mild by comparison. "You think you've won something, old man? I'll take everything away. Every dime, every share, every tool in that workshop. By the time my lawyers are done, you'll be living in that motel for the rest of your miserable life." Rhonda reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. "Julian loved you so much," she whispered. But Mr. Finch was organizing his papers with the careful attention of someone whose job was not finished. "Mrs. Carter, please sit down. We have not completed the reading." What else could there possibly be? Yvette remained standing, her hands planted on the conference table like weapons. Mr. Finch's smile was slight but unmistakable. "There is one more condition that affects all of prior distributions." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Whatever bomb Julian had prepared, Mr. Finch was about to detonate it. Mr. Finch's slight smile deepened as he reached for one final document from his carefully organized stack. The conference room fell silent, save for the gentle whir of the recording equipment and Yvette's ragged breathing as she processed the devastating news about the shared inheritance. "There is one more clause in the will," Mr. Finch announced, his voice carrying the weight of a final revelation. "A special condition Julian added 3 weeks before his death." Yvette's eyes narrowed dangerously. "What condition? Are you withholding something?" "The condition states," Mr. Finch read with measured precision, "that if my wife, Yvette Carter, attempts to force my father, Marcus Thorne, to leave our family home within 1 year of my death, the entire estate, including the house, vehicles, bank accounts, and company shares, automatically transfers in full to Marcus Thorne." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the traffic noise from 28 stories below seemed to stop. Yvette's face drained of all color as the implications crashed down on her like a collapsing building. "No." Her voice broke with desperate disbelief. This is a trap. He couldn't have known." "Julian also left a video recording explaining his motives," Mr. Finch continued, setting up a small screen. "He wanted you to understand his reasoning." The monitor flickered, and Julian's familiar face appeared, thinner than in health, but with eyes sharp with intelligence and love. My heart almost stopped at the sight of my son again, at hearing his voice from beyond the grave. "Yvette, if you are watching this, it means you have evicted my father from our home." Julian's voice was soft, but firm. "I hoped you would surprise me. I hoped the woman I married would show compassion during grief, but I know you too well." Yvette was hyperventilating now, her hands gripping the conference table until her knuckles went white. Victoria Pena was frantically taking notes, but her face showed professional alarm at her client's complete legal collapse. "Dad," Julian continued, looking directly into the camera with that engineer's precision I'd taught him, "I'm sorry you had to experience her cruelty, but I have protected you. Everything I built, everything I earned, is yours now. Use it well. Live comfortably. Honor Mom's memory in that house." The video paused, and Mr. Finch's quiet voice filled the stunned silence. The eviction occurred on March 15th, the day of Julian's funeral. The condition was immediately triggered. All assets transferred to Marcus Thorne with immediate effect. "This isn't legal!" Yvette's voice rose almost to a shriek. "A will can't have conditions like this." "It absolutely can," Mr. Finch calmly countered. "Conditional inheritance is perfectly legal in this state when the conditions are clearly stated and do not violate public policy." Julian consulted extensively to ensure enforceability. Victoria Pena finally found her voice. "We will challenge this immediately. Undue influence, mental incapacity, fraudulent document, discriminatory conditions. The video continues," Mr. Finch interrupted, restarting the recording. Julian smiled sadly from the screen. "Yvette, I loved you. I gave you everything I could, but love without kindness is just possession. Dad raised me to treat people with dignity, especially family. I hoped marriage would teach you the same values." Yvette gave a choked sound and doubled over as if physically struck. "If you had shown Dad even basic respect after my death, you would have inherited everything as my wife. But I knew your nature. I bet your greed would overcome your wisdom. I lost that bet, but Dad won his future." The video ended with Julian saying quietly, "I love you both, but I protect the people who love others more than themselves." Mr. Finch switched off the screen and faced the devastated room. "The legal transfer begins immediately. Mrs. Carter, you have 30 days to vacate the property." Yvette's breathing became rapid and shallow. Her eyes rolled back, and she slumped forward in her chair. Victoria Pena caught her as she fainted, calling for medical assistance. While paramedics were called and Yvette was revived with smelling salts, I remained seated, unmoving, overwhelmed by the magnitude of my son's love and foresight. He had known exactly who his wife was and exactly how she would behave. Even dying, he had protected me with surgical precision. Darius broke the stunned silence. Julian was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Rhonda leaned in and squeezed my hand. "He saved you, Marcus. Even from the grave, he saved you." Yvette was helped out of the conference room by the paramedics, Victoria Pena following with defeated professionalism. As they disappeared down the hallway, Mr. Finch began organizing the documents for the immediate legal transfer. I remained seated, staring at the blank video screen, where my son's face had been. Julian had given me everything: security, dignity, and the profound knowledge that his love would protect me forever. The game was over. Justice had been served by the most loving hand I had ever known. The next 2 months became a master class in legal futility. Despite losing everything by her own actions, Yvette launched into challenging Julian's will with the desperation of someone drowning in the consequences she herself had created. Victoria Pena's law firm occupied an entire floor of a downtown skyscraper. Its marble lobby was lined with awards for complex litigation. But all their expertise couldn't overcome one fundamental problem. Julian had been smarter than everyone in the room, including them. The conditional clause is discriminatory, Victoria argued during the first hearing on April 2nd. It penalizes my client for exercising her legal rights as a property owner. Judge Isabel Campos, a woman in her wishies with steel gray hair and no patience for frivolous arguments, reviewed the documents with clinical precision. The titular had every legal right to set conditions of inheritance, counsel. Nothing in state law prevents conditional bequests based on beneficiary behavior. I attended every hearing from the gallery, watching Yvette's legal team exhaust every possible angle of attack: undue influence, mental incapacity, fraudulent documentation, discriminatory conditions. Every argument crumbled under Mr. Finch's methodical defense and the video evidence of Julian's clear reasoning. "Mr. Thorne," Mr. Finch had explained during our preparation sessions, Julian spent 3 months drafting language that would survive any legal challenge. He consulted with estate planning specialists, constitutional lawyers, and behavioral psychologists. This will is bulletproof. The discovery phase revealed devastating evidence for Yvette's case. Witnesses testified about her behavior at the funeral. Darius described her increasing absenteeism during Julian's illness. Rhonda recounted years of observing Yvette's materialistic priorities. Even Mrs. Peterson from the church provided testimony about Yvette's inappropriate comments during the service. The deceased demonstrated clear mental capacity throughout his illness, testified Dr. Anya Sharma, Julian's oncologist. Mr. Thorne continued to make complex business decisions up to weeks before his death. His cognitive function was never impaired.
Yvette's own testimony proved disastrous. Under oath, she could not deny evicting me on the day of the funeral. She couldn't explain her absence during Julian's medical appointments. Most damagingly, she admitted spending money from the estate on legal fees before the will was even validated. So you accessed the estate accounts immediately following your husband's death? Mr. Finch asked during cross-examination. I had bills to pay, Yvette snapped, her carefully rehearsed composure cracking. Funeral expenses, legal consultations, including the fees to challenge the will, she assumed would give her everything. Victoria Peña's objection was sustained, but the damage was done. Yvette had revealed exactly the attitude Julian had predicted and protected against. By early May, even Victoria Peña was advising settlement. Marcus, this is not over, Yvette declared after another failed motion. I will find another way to fight this. But her resources were draining as quickly as her legal options. The expensive law firm required substantial retainers. Expert witnesses cost thousands per day. Meanwhile, Mr. Finch's fees were covered by the estate, giving us unlimited legal firepower. The final hearing on May 15th lasted only 30 minutes. Judge Campos had reached her decision based on the overwhelming evidence of Julian's mental capacity, the legal validity of the will, and Yvette's clear triggering of the conditional clause. The testator created a legal document expressing his clear intentions regarding asset distribution, Judge Campos announced. The conditional inheritance clause was correctly executed when the surviving spouse evicted the testator's father from the family residence. All challenges are hereby denied. Costs are awarded to the defendant. Yvette's shoulders slumped as the gavel fell. 2 months of costly legal warfare had ended exactly where Julian's video had predicted, with her losing everything due to her own choices. Mr. Finch and I stood in the courthouse hallway afterward, watching Yvette and Victoria Peña disappear toward the elevators. Yvette moved with the defeated posture of someone who had finally understood the price of cruelty. Your son was extraordinary, Mr. Finch said quietly. In 30 years of probate law, I've never seen such meticulous planning. Julian always finished what he started, I replied, thinking of all the model airplanes we'd built together, all the projects he'd completed with engineering precision. This had been his final project. Securing justice through love, protection through wisdom, and consequences through choice. Not even death could stop Julian from taking care of the people he cared about. Justice had been served not through revenge, but through the simple truth that actions have consequences, and love protects those who deserve protection. June 1st dawned clear and warm. The kind of city morning that promises summer is finally arriving. I stood on the front steps of the big house, holding the same keys Julian had given me 18 months earlier when I moved in to care for him. This time, however, I was not a guest or a tenant. I was home. The lock turned smoothly, and the front door opened into the hallway, where Yvette had stood blocking my entry just 2.5 months ago. Now the house felt different, not because anything had physically changed, but because love and justice had reclaimed it from greed and cruelty. Yvette had moved out the week before with surprising dignity. Our final conversation had been brief but civil. You won, Marcus, she had said while packing her jewelry box. But Julian isn't coming back. You're right, I'd replied. But his love and wisdom endure. She had nodded slowly, perhaps finally understanding that this hadn't been about winning or losing, but about consequences and character. I even helped her carry the suitcases to her car, because Julian had raised me to treat people with dignity, regardless of how they had treated me. The house felt peaceful now, filled with the memory of Julian's childhood and accomplishments. I had kept his home office exactly as he had left it. And that's where I was sitting when Darius called to discuss our first official business meeting. "Marcus, I know you never planned to run a tech company," Darius said over the phone, "but Julian left detailed strategic plans for the next 5 years. With your oversight and my operations management, we can build something worthy of his vision." "What did you have in mind?" "Expansion into educational software." Julian believed technology should help people learn and grow, not just organize their schedules. We could create learning platforms for engineering students, maybe partner with the local university. The conversation went on for an hour, covering growth projections, hiring plans, and Julian's notes on corporate social responsibility. My son had built more than a business. He had created a platform for positive change. As majority owner, I could ensure those platforms served purposes beyond profit. "Darius, I want to set up one more thing," I said as we wrapped up our call. "The Julian Thorne Memorial Scholarship Fund. Full scholarships for engineering students from working class families. Kids who have the brains, but not the bank accounts." Julian would love that idea. After hanging up, I walked through the house, rediscovering rooms that held decades of family history. In the workshop Julian had built for my retirement, I found a half-finished model fighter jet, one we had started together during one of his good days. I sat down at the workbench and picked up the small paintbrushes, stroking the wings with the same bright purple Julian had chosen for his childhood planes. Rhonda visited that evening, bringing a casserole and the kind of practical comfort family provides during transitions. "How are you adjusting to all of this?" she asked, settling into Julian's favorite chair with a cup of tea. "It's overwhelming sometimes," I admitted. "The money, the business, the responsibility. But I keep hearing Julian's voice telling me to use it well. He planned everything perfectly, didn't he? Better than perfect. He knew Yvette would show her true colors, and he protected me from her. Even dying, he was looking out for his old man." Rhonda smiled sadly. "That boy loved you more than his own life." Later that night, I sat in Julian's office, reviewing the scholarship fund documentation Mr. Finch had prepared. The program would provide full tuition, living expenses, and mentorship for 20 students per year. In 10 years, we would have helped 200 bright young people realize their dreams. The phone rang as I was closing the files. The caller ID showed the university. "Mr. Thorne, this is Professor Sophia Reyes. I wanted to personally thank you for establishing the Memorial Scholarship Fund. The first recipient is a young woman from a Southside neighborhood whose father works 3 jobs to support the family. She reminds me so much of Julian. Brilliant, determined, and focused on using engineering to help people." After the call ended, I sat quietly at the desk, looking at Julian's photograph on the table. At 22, he was full of dreams about changing the world through technology. Now, even after death, he was making those dreams possible for others. Outside, the suburbs settled into the quiet of the night. The house felt alive with purpose, rather than empty with grief. Julian's love had created not just justice, but a continuous hope for the future. His cruelty had been transformed into opportunity for deserving young people. I picked up the small model plane and painted one more purple stripe on its wing. Some traditions were worth continuing. Some loves were worth honoring. And some justice was worth waiting for. Julian had been right about everything, as always. Love protects, wisdom prevails, and sometimes, if you plan carefully enough, you can take care of the people you love, even after you're gone. The old workshop hummed quietly around me as I worked, and I could almost hear my son's voice. "Looks good, Dad, but maybe
try a little more purple on the tail section. Did you like my story? If you listened till the end, drop a number 1 in the comments. If you enjoyed it, you can support me by liking the video and sending a small tip. I've got lots of other life stories like this on my channel, so make sure to subscribe and check them out. I've added 2 new stories on screen that everyone loves. Thanks for being here. See you in the next one, with love.